Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I make videos about dyeing, sewing, and upcycling. If you're new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. It does wonders for my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made a quilted coat, but first let's go over the supplies. I'll link everything down in the description below. First you're going to need some scrap fabric. I used about 2 big bags of scrap fabric, polyester batting, Sashiko thread and a needle for hand stitching. I used a serger and I had thread for the serger, a sewing machine, an iron to iron as you go. You can use an ironing board or an ironing mat. I have a mat that is for quilting specifically and I love it. You're going to need a coat pattern of your choice, and I will list the coat pattern that I used in this video. Bias tape. You can either make your bias tape or you can buy bias tape. I used extra sharp pins for this project, and fabric scissors, of course, to cut your fabric. A ruler and a French curve, a quilting marker that's washable, and a D-ring or some kind of closure for your coat. So I am going to make a quilted jacket and I'm really excited. I'm going to use this pattern here, and I've never used this pattern, but I think it's going to be pretty easy because it has like an easy collar and everything. I had a chance to read through the instructions and I'm going to just try to flare it out a little bit at the bottom just because for me I like that. And here are the pieces, and you can see I kind of sketched where I'm going to flare them out. I'm not going to do a pocket. And this was the inspiration for this piece. And I might add a little like sash with the D-ring, but I think it'll be really cute. And I'm excited to quilt a jacket. I see everyone wearing them online and in the park and everything, and I just think they're so cute. So the first thing I did was to open up the instructions and read them to see how to put together the jacket. This jacket is meant for a lining and like a wool outer shell. So I'm doing a quilting project and it's not going to be exactly like this, but I am just checking it out to make sure I know how to construct the jacket. So my plan is to cut out 2 of each outer shell piece and a piece of batting that same size and quilt them together. And I'm just going to quilt the pieces individually, and then I will sew all those pieces together as quilted pieces. So I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm going to ignore the lining parts, which means I'm going to pretty much ignore these instructions. If you've been a follower of my channel, you know that I love to do indigo tie-dye or shibori, and I'm going to be using up a lot of indigo tie-dye scraps that I have for this project. So I'm going to actually make a patchwork of these pieces and then cut out the coat. So let's get started. So I have got my pattern pieces out of the bag and I cut them apart, and I'm just kind of analyzing them to see exactly how big they are. Like I said, I'm going to add about 1 inch on the side to flare out. So that's going to be on the front sides and the back sides. So those are my pieces right there. And I'm just going to add it once I get it on the fabric. So now it's time to quilt together or patchwork these pieces of indigo tie-dye. And I'm doing kind of like a crazy quilt pattern. I'm just using some of my favorite pieces and I'm putting them together to make a solid piece of fabric that I can then pin my pattern to and cut out the pieces. Like I said, I have so many scraps of test patterns and pieces from workshops that I've taught, and I can't get rid of them, and I love them all. So this is an awesome opportunity for me to patchwork them together and make something really cool. So I've sewn together like a big piece of patchwork so that I can put my pattern pieces on. You can see it's not quite big enough, the sleeve's hanging off there, and I'm going to add an extra inch to the side seam. Like you can see here, I'm just using my clear ruler, and I'm going to flare it out at about the waist. So here's an overhead shot of how I did this. That you can see that I have two of the side pieces cut out. One is from the front and one is for the back. And I have to cut out another set of them. So I'm putting them right sides down to cut them out again. And I've just made another block of patchwork quilted shibori. And I'm just making sure they fit. The one piece on the bottom here fits perfectly. And then this piece here needs a little bit more to cover that sleeve. But once I get that done, I can cut it out, and then I can use any of the leftover scraps to make another block for the inside pieces of the quilt. You can see I have quite a bit more fabric over there in the corner to add to my pieces, so I'm in good shape. So I cut out the front and the back, two sides of each for left and right, and now it's time to cut out the backs of the quilt. I know I said I'm not doing a lining, like a true lining, but I do have to have a back to sandwich that batting. So I'm doing a little bit more simple patchworks for that part. You can see I'm using bigger pieces, and I'm gonna just cut out two of each of those two. So I need 4 of each piece total. So now I'm cutting out the batting, and I'm just trying to lay it out so that I don't waste any of the batting. This is just a polyester batting from Amazon, and I'll put the link down below in case you want to check it out. But I'm going to cut them out, one for each sandwich of piece. So that's the next step. If you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up and let me know what kind of sewing tutorials you guys want to see. So after I get everything cut out, I'm going to start to put my pieces together, sandwiching with the top layer, the batting, and the bottom layer, and I'm going to start quilting it. I'm quilting the collar here, and I'm quilting it by hand with this Sashiko thread that is so beautiful. I kind of wanted to give this like a little bit of a kantha quilt look, you can see here. And here are some of the other pieces that I've put together. You can see I have the front and the back and the collar done. I just worked my way through all of the pieces of the coat and enjoyed my time of quilting. This was very time consuming. I'm not going to lie to you. You do not have to quilt it by hand. I just chose to do it so that it has that kind of hand quilted look. And, you know, I just put on my favorite podcast or my favorite YouTube videos and went to town. Once I got all of the pieces quilted, I pinned it together so that I could get a rough idea of how it was going to fit. So I'm just going to try it on. It's inside out right now, but I just want to kind of get an idea of how it looks and if it's going to fit before I start sewing it up too much. I want the coat to be oversized, but I think it's looking too oversized, and one way I'm going to fix it is by bringing that sleeve seam up inside and kind of just easing it into the side seam of the body. I'm going to take it up a little bit. I also serged all of the edges. You can see here, I wanted to clean it up and make sure that there was no overlapping fabric or pieces of batting sticking out. So I'll do that on all of the pieces. This is the bottom where I have all of the knots for the hand quilting. I'm actually going to wait to serge that until the end, until the entire coat is put together, and I can just serge the hem and be very careful not to cut the knots off. So here they are, all serged and quilted and looking beautiful. Now I'm going to put the pieces together, and I'm going to start with the princess seam. I'm going to start at my shoulder, and I'm just going to keep clipping all of my threads. There's so many threads in this project, so I'm clipping constantly. So what I like to do is I like to pin at the top and at the bottom, and then kind of ease everything in slowly. That's how I was always taught to pin, so that you can get the curve in there as best as possible. So there is the princess seam and the curve at the bust line. So that is the most important part. You want to make sure that that is actually like a 3-dimensional seam. So I'm going to work my way through that curve with the pins. So once I get it pinned, you can see inside some of the patchwork. That's the front, which is very cool. And here is the back. So it has a center panel and then 2 side panels. The front has 2 side panels and then 2 center front panels that overlap because it has that princess seam and that overlapping front. So once they're pinned together, I'm going to sew them up, and I'm using a big stitch just to accommodate all that bulk with my machine, and I'm using a pretty heavy duty needle, so you don't want to break your needles. So I'm using something that I would use probably with like denim. So here's a shot of it after I have sewn together the princess seams, and I am going to top stitch on those princess seams, and then I'm going to pin it together with the right sides out to try it on for fit one more time before I sew it up. So I have safety pinned it together with the right side out so you can see what the outside of this coat will look like. And I'm just checking it for fit. I want to avoid seam ripping at all costs, but so far it's looking pretty good. It's bigger than I want it, and I am going to sew the shoulder seam next from the neckline to the hem, and then I'm going to sew the underarm seam after that. I am going to take it in at the armpit like I was saying, just to make it have a slimmer fit of the sleeve. At this stage of the game, I actually decided that I wanted to round the points of the collar. For me, I just think it works better with my wardrobe, and I'm going to cut the tips of the collar off next. So I'm going to take my French curve, and I'm going to come in with my washable quilting marker and just mark a curve. Just going to work it into the existing lines. And like I said, this is totally a personal preference. I just wanted to round the collars. So then once I like the shape that it is, I'm going to take my Sharpie and to mark it so that it doesn't disappear. So I'm going to do both sides, and then I'm going to cut it. Let me know down in the comments below, would you have kept the points or would you round it as a shawl collar too? Next, I'm going to stay stitch along that new curve so that I don't have any fraying or stretching. So at this stage of the game, I took these extra pieces and started experimenting with actually doing some machine quilting, and I did a little channel quilting. I tried it horizontally and vertically, and I decided that the vertical looked the best. And I decided to quilt the entire thing by machine again with white thread just to make it a little bit sturdier. I was worried that the hand stitching was going to come out or pull, and so I decided to just do all of the pieces over. I quilted the pieces with the princess lines still sewn together, so I didn't have to seam rip. It wasn't a time-consuming step, but I'm glad that I decided to do it. So here you can see the pieces have been channel quilted by machine and by hand, and it just gives it a much more quilted look, and I really am happy with the way it turned out. So after that, I decided to add the D-ring, and I'm going to put it inside the princess seam, not on the outside of the fold over. That's just a personal preference I'm going to do, and I'm just sewing it into that princess seam there. I just opened it up a little bit and stuck it in. So now it's finally time to pin the front pieces to the back, and I'm overlapping the piece I want on top first. So I'm starting just with the shoulder seams first, and I've sewn them from the neckline to the seam hem, and then I'm going to top stitch that down so that it's a little bit more flat, and I'm first going to give it a nice press. So now that it's pressed, it's ready to top stitch. So here's the coat. You can kind of get a little bit of a visual of what it's going to look like, and I have sewn the shoulder seams on both sides with top stitching. And the next thing I'm going to do is to bind the sleeve hem. I'm going to do that before I sew that underarm seam. It's going to be easier to bind it when it's flat. I'm going to bind this entire jacket because it has no lining, and I'm going to bind it with a bias tape. I'm using this really pretty hand printed stripe that I had in my fabric stash, and I'm just going to make a bias tape. I've folded it in half so it's less unruly, and I'm just marking out 2-inch strips. I'm going to just mark out the whole piece of fabric, and then I'm going to cut out as many strips as I want. So then I'm going to press them into a bias tape. What I'm going to do is fold it into halves first and press it all the way to the end of the strips. And then I'm going to take the edges and fold them about halfway into the length of the half. So I don't want it to be kissing the center fold. I want it to be a little bit less, and that's going to give me a nice wide bias tape. You can also buy bias tape if you want. I just wanted to do a custom print bias tape. So if you want to make your bias tape, you totally can, or you can buy it. After I get the edges folded in, I'm going to fold it in half again along that original fold line, and just give it a nice press. I also like to then pin it together while it's still kind of hot so that it doesn't come undone. That way I can make all of the bias tape I need for the project, and it will stay folded until I'm ready to use it. So now I'm going to put my bias tape on the sleeve hem, and I'm going to just put it right along the edge of that fold and carefully pin it. I'm going to start at the bulkiest part, which is the seam, and then just pin all the way to the ends. And then I'm making sure I have enough for the other sleeve, and I'm just going to trim it and pin the other sleeve, and then I'll sew it on. After I get the sleeve hem bound, I'm going to pin up those side seams and finally sew it together. I'm going to use a lot of pins, and after I get it sewn together, I'm going to give it a nice press. So after that, I put the binding on the hem of the coat, and I pinned on my new shawl collar to check for the placement. I made sure to pull the collar taut to make sure it gets that nice rollover, and I pinned it with some safety pins just to see if I like the placement. I was happy with the placement of the collar, so I marked it at the bottom, and then I pinned it to sew on. So I sewed the collar on, and then I serged the edges just to make sure it's nice and clean. And now I'm going to top stitch that seam onto the body of the coat so that I get that nice rollover for the collar. The next thing I'm going to do is to figure out where I want to put the sash. I'm going to use this same fabric, and I'm just kind of eyeballing the width of the sash, but I want to make it about the same width as the D-ring itself. So I'm just going to serge the edge to make it the right width, and then turn it right side out, give it a nice press, and then turn those raw edges inside to make it a nice rectangle. I'm going to give it a nice press and then top stitch on top of those ends. So now I need to bind the center front seam, and I'm going to just carefully pin it on. I'm using a lot of pins. The devil is in the details with this, and I find that I get the best results when I use a lot of pins and just go slow. So I'm going to work my way up from the hem of the coat around the collar, which is a little tricky with that seam there. So I'm just going to use a lot of pins and be very careful when I'm sewing that seam where the collar connects. I'm going to go around the collar and all the way down to the other end of the hem. This took quite a lot of bias tape, and I ran out of bias tape, so I had to connect 2 of my strips together. If that happens to you, you can just connect them at a 90-degree angle. So you connect the 45-degree angle at a 90-degree angle, so that way it will be straight when you sew it. It makes sense when you do it, but it can be a little bit confusing. So once you get it sewn, just trim off that extra tail, and then you can pull it tight, and you'll see that it is a continuous line of bias tape. Then I'm going to press it just to make sure it's all nice. So after I get all of the binding on, it's time to add my sash and top stitch it down. I have pinned it on where I want it, and I'm using a lot of pins, and I'm just going to straight stitch it on to the front of my coat. Another detail to note is that I left a tail when I was stitching the binding at the bottom hem, and I'm just going to miter it and hand stitch it so that it's a nice clean corner. Okay, you guys, are you ready for the big reveal? I finally finished my coat. Took me a long time. I started it in my old studio and I finished it in my new studio, and I am so happy to finally have it finished. So let me show you the final result. So it goes to about mid-thigh, which I like, so I can wear it with leggings and it kind of covers my bum. And I have a nice shawl collar, which I think is cute. It's asymmetrical, which is perfect because this is an asymmetrical opening. And I made the sleeves smaller, so they're not quite as like overwhelming. It's a really lightweight coat made out of all cotton, so it's perfect for the springtime. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments if you've ever made a quilt coat and how it went, or if you're planning to make a quilt coat. Let me know what kind of pattern you're going to use. I'd love to make another quilt coat. This was a really fun project, and now I have a lot more ideas of like what I want to do in the future. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you like videos about dyeing, sewing, or upcycling, I have a lot more sewing videos in line for the spring, so I'm really excited about that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and be sure to check out my channel for more dyeing, sewing, and upcycling videos. All right, see you guys next time. Bye! Thank you guys so much for watching. You can go and follow me on my social medias at Onyx Art Studios for more inspiration, and also check out my online dyeing classes on my website, onyxartstudio.com, and be sure to sign up for my mailing list. Here are some of my other videos from my channel that you might enjoy. Go and check them out now. Thanks for watching. Bye.